Low calcium shows up as muscle cramps in the middle of the night. It shows up as brittle nails, as teeth that chip more easily than they used to, as that heavy, tired feeling in your legs by the afternoon. Your bones are quietly giving up their reserves, and by the time a scan shows the damage, it has usually been building for years without a single obvious symptom. Here's the part almost nobody tells you. Long before calcium pills existed, people were getting everything they needed from the same foods that show up again and again in the pages of Scripture, plus a few more that simply belong on the same table. My name is John, and today we're going through 15 foods that are genuine calcium powerhouses. Stick with me to the end, because food number 15 is a tiny seed that most people walk right past in the grocery store. And as always, this content is not intended as professional medical or nutritional advice. It does not replace any medication or treatment prescribed by a qualified healthcare professional. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional before making changes to your diet, supplement, or health routine. Food number 1, milk. When the Bible describes the Promised Land, it doesn't call it a land of gold or a land of grain. It calls it a land flowing with milk and honey, mentioned about 20 times from Exodus all the way through Deuteronomy. That phrase was not poetry for poetry's sake. In a world without refrigeration, without pharmacies, without fortified cereal, milk was one of the few reliable, year-round sources of real nourishment a family could count on. Now let's talk about why that matters for you today. 1 cup of milk delivers around 300 milligrams of calcium, roughly a quarter of what most adults need in a day, and it comes packaged with vitamin D and phosphorus, 2 nutrients your body needs working alongside calcium to actually build and maintain bone. Calcium without vitamin D is like mailing a letter with no address. It might be sitting right there, but your body can't get it where it needs to go. That's why milk fortified with vitamin D tends to outperform plant sources on paper, even when the raw calcium numbers look similar. Beyond bones, milk is genuinely useful for blood pressure. The combination of calcium, potassium, and magnesium in dairy has been linked in numerous studies to modestly lower blood pressure readings, which matters enormously once you're past 50 and your arteries aren't quite as forgiving as they used to be. The protein in milk, specifically whey and casein, also helps preserve muscle mass, and muscle loss is one of the quiet reasons older adults fall more easily. Strong muscles protect the joints around them and give you a split second to catch your balance instead of going straight down. Now the honest caveat. A huge number of adults, especially as they age, lose much of the enzyme needed to properly digest lactose, leading to bloating, cramping, or worse after a glass of milk. If that's you, lactose-free milk or aged cheese, which naturally contains very little lactose, solves the problem without giving up the calcium. And if you're watching saturated fat for heart reasons, reaching for low-fat or skim rather than whole milk keeps the calcium benefit while trimming the part your cardiologist worries about. Food number 2, cheese. 1 Samuel. Chapter 17 gives us one of the more charming small details in the entire Bible. Before David faces Goliath, his father sends him to check on his brothers at the battle line, and part of what he carries with him is 10 cheeses, meant as a gift for the commander of that unit. Later, in 2 Samuel 17, during Absalom's rebellion, a group of loyal men bring David cheese from the herd, along with grain, honey, and curds, to feed his exhausted army in the wilderness. Cheese was not a garnish in the ancient world. It was portable, shelf-stable protein and calcium, exactly the kind of food you'd hand to soldiers or a young shepherd heading into a fight. The reason cheese punches so far above its weight nutritionally is concentration. Making cheese essentially squeezes the water out of milk and leaves behind the solids, which means the calcium gets concentrated right along with the protein and fat. An ounce of hard cheese like cheddar or Parmesan can deliver somewhere around 200 milligrams of calcium, and Parmesan in particular is one of the densest calcium sources you can buy at a regular grocery store, largely because of how long it's aged and how little moisture remains. For older adults specifically, cheese offers something milk doesn't always provide as conveniently. A concentrated dose you can spread on a cracker or melt into vegetables when appetite is low, and a full glass of anything feels like too much. Poor appetite is a real and under-discussed problem in aging, and foods that pack nutrition into a small volume matter more than people realize. The protein in cheese also supports the same muscle-preserving benefits we just covered with milk, and many aged cheeses are naturally low in lactose, which makes them a gentler option for anyone whose stomach doesn't tolerate dairy the way it used to. There's also a practical, everyday reason cheese has stuck around in nearly every culture on Earth for thousands of years. It doesn't spoil the way fresh milk does. It travels well, and it turns a plain vegetable, a piece of bread, or a bowl of beans into something genuinely satisfying, which matters when you're trying to build a habit that actually lasts rather than a rule you abandon after 2 weeks. The caveat here is sodium and saturated fat. Cheese can be salty, and if you're managing blood pressure or heart disease, portion size matters more than it does with milk. A 1 to 2 ounce serving a few times a week gets you real benefit without overdoing the sodium. If you're on a strict low-sodium diet, look for reduced sodium varieties or fresh cheeses like mozzarella, which tend to run lower on the salt scale than aged hard cheeses. Food number 3, curds and yogurt. Curds show up in the Bible as almost a symbol of comfort and abundance. Genesis 18 has Abraham serving curds alongside milk and a freshly prepared calf to his 3 unexpected guests. Isaiah 7, verse 15, describes a child eating curds and honey, a phrase used to represent a time of simple, sustaining provision. Judges 5 recounts Jael offering curds to the exhausted General Sisera before the story takes its dramatic turn. Curds, in the ancient world, were essentially an early cousin of what we now call yogurt, milk that had been deliberately soured and thickened, which also happened to make it last longer and sit easier on the stomach than fresh milk. That last detail turns out to be scientifically important. When milk is fermented into yogurt, the bacteria involved partially break down lactose, which is why so many people who struggle with regular milk can handle yogurt just fine. You still get the calcium, typically around 300 milligrams per cup, sometimes higher in Greek-style yogurt, but with a gentler digestive footprint. The added benefit that curds and yogurt bring to the table is the live bacterial cultures themselves. A healthy gut microbiome has been tied in a growing body of research to better immune function, more consistent digestion, and even mood regulation, something that matters enormously for older adults dealing with the isolation and slower digestion that often come with age. Plain yogurt also tends to be higher in protein than milk by volume, particularly the strained Greek varieties, which again supports muscle mass and helps you feel fuller for longer, useful if blood sugar or weight is something you're keeping an eye on. Yogurt has also earned some genuine attention in research for its connection to healthier blood sugar control over time, with several long-term studies linking regular yogurt eaters to a lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes compared to people who rarely eat it. Nobody claims yogurt alone explains that difference, but it's a reasonable piece of evidence for why this ancient, simple food has held on to its place at the table for so many thousands of years. The one real caution is sugar. Flavored yogurts marketed with fruit on the label can carry as much added sugar as a candy bar, which quietly cancels out the benefit. Plain or lightly sweetened yogurt, with your own honey or real fruit stirred in, gives you all of the calcium and the probiotic benefit without smuggling in a dessert's worth of sugar under a health food label. Food number 4, sardines. Fish and calcium don't usually get mentioned in the same sentence, but sardines are the exception that changes the whole conversation. The Sea of Galilee sits at the center of huge stretches of the New Testament. Peter, Andrew, James, and John were working fishermen there before they were anything else, and the miracle of the loaves and fishes, described in both Matthew 14 and John 6, fed a crowd of thousands with small fish, very likely similar to the sardines and tilapia still pulled from that same lake today. In the ancient world, small fish were commonly eaten whole, bones included, nothing wasted, nothing thrown away. That detail about the bones is the whole secret to why sardines matter so much for calcium. A single small can of sardines, the kind packed with the tiny soft bones still intact, delivers somewhere around 300 to 350 milligrams of calcium, genuinely rivaling a full glass of milk, and it comes from an animal source your body absorbs efficiently. The bones soften completely during canning, so you're not crunching on anything unpleasant. You're simply getting calcium in one of its most naturally bioavailable forms. Sardines bring something else to the table that almost no other calcium-rich food can claim: a strong dose of vitamin D and omega-3 fatty acids in the very same bite. Remember what we said earlier about vitamin D being the addressee on the envelope for calcium. Sardines write their own address and deliver the letter in one motion. The omega-3 fats in sardines are also linked to lower inflammation throughout the body, better cognitive function as we age, and measurable improvements in heart health, including healthier triglyceride levels. There's also a practical reason sardines deserve more credit than they usually get. They're inexpensive, they last for years in the pantry without refrigeration, and they require no preparation at all beyond opening the can, which makes them one of the most realistic calcium habits for anyone who finds cooking a bigger chore than it used to be. The caution with sardines is sodium, since most are canned in salt-containing liquid, so anyone managing blood pressure should watch portion sizes or rinse them before eating. People with gout or a history of high uric acid should also know that sardines are relatively high in purines, which can trigger flare-ups in susceptible individuals. So, it's worth checking with your doctor if that applies to you. Food number 5, almonds. Almonds have one of the more beautiful appearances in Scripture. In Numbers 17, God instructs each tribal leader to place a staff before the ark, and by morning, Aaron's staff had not only budded, it had blossomed and produced ripe almonds overnight, a sign confirming his priesthood. Genesis 43 has Jacob sending almonds among the gifts his sons carried down to Egypt during the famine, treating them as a delicacy worth offering to a foreign official. Ecclesiastes 12 even uses the blossoming almond tree as a gentle image for aging, the white flowers compared to graying hair, which feels fitting for exactly who this video is for. Nutritionally, almonds are one of the better plant sources of calcium you can reach for, with roughly 75 milligrams in a small handful, alongside a hefty dose of magnesium, a mineral that works hand in hand with calcium and vitamin D to actually regulate how much calcium ends up in your bones rather than floating around where it isn't needed. Magnesium deficiency is genuinely common in older adults, partly because certain blood pressure and reflux medications deplete it, and almonds are a simple, tasty way to help close that gap. Beyond bone health, almonds have a strong track record with heart health. The fat in almonds is mostly the same monounsaturated type found in olive oil, and regular almond consumption has been associated in research with improved cholesterol numbers, specifically lower LDL, the kind that clogs arteries. Almonds are also high in fiber and protein for a snack food, which helps steady blood sugar, something particularly useful for anyone managing prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, since a small handful of almonds, instead of crackers or pretzels, produces a much gentler impact on blood sugar. Almonds also carry a decent amount of vitamin E, an antioxidant that supports skin health and helps protect cells throughout the body from everyday wear and tear, and the combination of fat, fiber, and protein in a small handful makes them one of the more satisfying snacks available, which matters if you're trying to avoid the mid-afternoon slump that sends most people reaching for something sugary instead. The real caution here is twofold. Tree nut allergies are common and can be severe, so this is obviously not for anyone with that history. And almonds contain oxalates, compounds that can contribute to kidney stones in people who are prone to them. So, anyone with a personal history of calcium, oxalate stones should talk to their doctor about how many almonds is reasonable rather than eating them by the handful daily. Food number 6, chickpeas. Chickpeas aren't named by their modern title anywhere in Scripture, but they were absolutely part of daily life across the biblical world. Archaeological digs throughout the ancient Near East, including sites in Israel dating back thousands of years, regularly turn up stores of chickpeas alongside lentils, barley, and wheat, the standard pantry of the region. Roasted chickpeas, in particular, were a common street food and traveling snack in exactly the kind of Mediterranean climate the biblical narrative takes place in, the ancient equivalent of grabbing a bag of nuts for the road. What makes chickpeas worth including here is how efficiently they combine calcium with a whole cluster of other bone-supporting nutrients. A cup of cooked chickpeas gives you around 80 milligrams of calcium, which is modest on its own, but chickpeas are also loaded with magnesium, phosphorus, and manganese, all minerals your skeleton needs working together, not just calcium in isolation. Bone is a living tissue built from a whole team of minerals, and chickpeas quietly supply several teammates at once. Chickpeas also happen to be one of the better foods for steady, long-lasting energy. The combination of fiber and protein slows digestion dramatically, which means the carbohydrates in chickpeas enter your bloodstream gradually instead of in a rush, avoiding the spike and crash pattern that leaves you tired and reaching for something sweet an hour later. Regular legume consumption, chickpeas included, has been linked in large population studies to lower rates of heart disease and improved cholesterol, along with better digestive regularity thanks to their impressive fiber content. There's also something worth mentioning about chickpeas and weight management, since that's a concern for a lot of people managing joint pain, where every extra pound puts more pressure on already sensitive knees and hips. Because chickpeas are so filling relative to their calorie count, swapping them in for a portion of meat or refined carbohydrate a few times a week is one of the easier, more sustainable ways to trim calories without feeling like you're constantly hungry. The main downside is one most people already know from experience: gas and bloating, especially if you're not used to eating much fiber. Introducing chickpeas gradually, rinsing canned varieties thoroughly, and cooking dried chickpeas properly with a full soak beforehand all reduce this considerably. Anyone with irritable bowel syndrome may find chickpeas trigger symptoms and might do better starting with very small portions. Food number 7, white beans. Beans get a direct and specific biblical mention in Ezekiel 4, verse 9, where the prophet is instructed to make a bread using wheat, barley, beans, lentils, millet, and spelt, a recipe meant to sustain him through a long and difficult period. 2 Samuel 17 lists beans right alongside lentils, honey, and cheese among the provisions brought to David's exhausted army. Beans were not an afterthought in the ancient diet. They were foundational, filling, storable, and capable of feeding a family through a lean season when meat was scarce. White beans specifically, the cannellini and Great Northern types, are among the more calcium-rich beans available, with a cooked cup delivering somewhere in the neighborhood of 160 to 190 milligrams, genuinely respectable for a plant food. They're also one of the best dietary sources of resistant starch, a type of fiber that feeds the beneficial bacteria in your gut and has been associated with improved insulin sensitivity, meaning your body needs to work less hard to manage blood sugar after a meal that includes them. For older adults, white beans offer a particularly useful combination. They're filling, inexpensive, and remarkably heart-healthy. Studies following large groups of people over many years have consistently found that regular bean eaters have lower rates of cardiovascular disease and a reduced risk of certain cancers, particularly colorectal cancer, likely thanks to the fiber content feeding a healthier gut lining. Beans are also a genuinely good source of iron and folate, two nutrients that become more important to track carefully as we age and appetite naturally shrinks. White beans also happen to be an unusually good source of plant-based protein, which matters more than people realize once you're past 60, since your body becomes somewhat less efficient at using protein to maintain muscle, meaning older adults often need slightly more of it than younger adults, not less. A cup of white beans provides a meaningful chunk of that daily requirement without any of the saturated fat that comes packaged with a lot of animal protein sources. As with chickpeas, the trade-off is digestive. Beans contain sugars that some people's digestive systems handle poorly, leading to gas. Soaking dried beans overnight and discarding that soaking water before cooking removes a good portion of the culprits, and easing into larger portions over a few weeks lets your gut bacteria adjust. People on blood thinners like warfarin should also know that beans, while not as high in vitamin K as leafy greens, still contribute some. So, consistency in your intake week to week matters more than avoidance. Food number 8, collard greens. Leafy greens don't get a single named verse the way almonds or figs do, but Scripture repeatedly references herbs and greens of the field as part of the basic biblical diet, going back to Genesis itself, where green plants are described as given for food. Across the Mediterranean and Middle Eastern world of that era, hearty leafy greens, cooked down with a bit of oil, were an everyday staple, not a modern health trend, but simply what people ate because it grew reliably and filled the stomach. Collard greens deserve a spot on this list because they are, quite simply, one of the single best plant sources of calcium available, with a cooked cup delivering something in the range of 250 to 270 milligrams, nearly matching a full glass of milk. What makes this especially good news is that the calcium in collards is unusually well absorbed by the body compared to many other greens, because collards are relatively low in oxalates, the compounds that bind up calcium in foods like spinach and prevent much of it from actually being used. Beyond the calcium itself, collards are loaded with vitamin K, a nutrient your body uses to actually direct calcium into your bones rather than letting it drift into soft tissue where it doesn't belong, including your arteries. They're also rich in vitamin A and vitamin C, both important for immune function, and they bring a substantial amount of fiber for very few calories, which makes them a smart addition if you're watching your weight while still needing to eat enough volume to feel satisfied. Cooking collards low and slow, the way they've traditionally been prepared in Southern American and West African cooking alike, actually helps here too, since gentle cooking with a bit of fat helps your body absorb more of the fat-soluble vitamins A and K sitting inside the leaves, meaning the old-fashioned way of preparing them turns out to line up nicely with what nutrition science now understands about how these vitamins are absorbed. The one real caution involves blood thinners. Collard greens are extremely high in vitamin K, and anyone taking warfarin needs to keep their intake of vitamin K-rich greens fairly consistent from week to week, since sudden increases can interfere with how the medication works. This isn't a reason to avoid collards. It's simply a conversation worth having with your doctor so your dosage and your diet stay in sync. Food number 9, dandelion greens. This is the one people are always surprised to learn is genuinely biblical. Exodus 12 and Numbers 9 both instruct the Israelites to eat bitter herbs as part of the Passover meal, a detail still observed in Jewish households today, where dandelion greens, along with chicory and endive, remain traditional choices for maror, the bitter herbs on the Seder plate. The bitterness was symbolic, meant to represent the harshness of slavery in Egypt, but the plants chosen for the job happened to be nutritional heavyweights, which was likely no accident in a culture that understood these greens intimately from daily foraging. Dandelion greens, the same ones most people spend their weekends pulling out of the lawn, deliver around 140 to 150 milligrams of calcium per cooked cup, putting them right up alongside collards and kale in the leafy green calcium rankings. They're also one of the richest sources of vitamin K per calorie of nearly anything you can eat, which again matters for directing calcium where it belongs, into bone rather than into blood vessels. What makes dandelion greens particularly interesting for older adults is their traditional use as a mild diuretic and digestive aid, something herbalists have leaned on for centuries and modern research has started to take seriously. They may help gently reduce water retention and support liver function, and their bitter compounds have been shown in some studies to stimulate digestive enzymes, which can be genuinely helpful for anyone whose appetite or digestion has slowed with age. They're also rich in vitamin A and antioxidants that support eye health, something worth paying attention to as macular degeneration risk rises over time. If you've never eaten dandelion greens on purpose, the younger leaves tend to be far less bitter than the older ones, and a quick sauté with garlic and a splash of lemon takes most of the edge off while keeping the nutrition intact, which makes them a much friendlier introduction than eating them straight off the lawn the way the Israelites likely would have during that first bitter Passover. The caution here is straightforward. Because of that same diuretic effect, anyone on diuretic medication for blood pressure or heart failure should talk to their doctor before eating large quantities regularly, since the combined effect could be more than intended. And like collards, the vitamin K content means consistency matters if you're on blood thinners. Food number 10, turnip greens. Turnips themselves are not named directly in Scripture, but they were a common root vegetable throughout the ancient Mediterranean and Near East, hardy enough to survive poor soil and store well through winter, exactly the kind of practical, unglamorous crop that fed real families in the biblical era, even without earning its own verse. We're including them here because the greens attached to the root happen to be one of the most calcium-dense vegetables you can put on a plate, and no complete list of biblical-era calcium sources would be honest without at least one entry representing this whole category of hardy, humble, root vegetable greens that fed people through the leanest months. A cooked cup of turnip greens delivers close to 200 milligrams of calcium, again rivaling dairy, and like collards, that calcium is well absorbed since turnip greens are relatively low in the oxalates that block absorption in some other greens. They also bring a strong dose of vitamin C, an unusual combination for a leafy green, and one that actually helps your body absorb the iron sitting right there in the same plate. Turnip greens have earned genuine research attention for their role in reducing inflammation throughout the body, largely thanks to a group of plant compounds called glucosinolates, the same family found in broccoli and kale, which have been studied for potential protective effects against certain cancers, particularly of the digestive tract. For older adults managing joint pain or general stiffness, a diet higher in these anti-inflammatory compounds, alongside adequate calcium and vitamin K for bone density, addresses two problems with one humble vegetable. There's a nice bit of practicality here too. Because both the root and the greens are edible, a single turnip essentially gives you two different vegetables for the price of one: a hearty starchy root and a calcium-rich green, which was likely a big part of their appeal to families working with limited land and a limited growing season in the ancient world. The caution is nearly identical to the other greens on this list. High vitamin K content means blood thinner users need consistency rather than avoidance, and anyone with a history of thyroid issues should know that very large amounts of raw cruciferous vegetables like turnip greens can mildly interfere with thyroid hormone production in rare cases, though cooking largely neutralizes this effect, so a normal cooked serving is not something to worry about. Food number 11, figs. Figs may be the most consistently celebrated fruit in the entire Bible. The spies sent into Canaan in Numbers 13 return carrying figs as proof of the land's abundance. 1 Kings 4 describes the peace and prosperity of Solomon's reign, with the image of every man sitting under his own vine and fig tree. 1 Samuel 25 and 30 both mention cakes of pressed figs being given as provisions to hungry, traveling men. And in one of the more unusual healing moments in Scripture, 2 Kings 20 describes a poultice of figs being applied to heal King Hezekiah's boil. Figs, fresh or dried, were medicine, celebration, and daily sustenance all at once. Dried figs carry a real amount of calcium, with a half cup delivering somewhere around 100 to 120 milligrams, more than most fruits by a wide margin, since drying concentrates the mineral content along with everything else. They're also one of the better fruit sources of potassium, a mineral that works alongside sodium to help regulate blood pressure, and getting enough of it is one of the more overlooked pieces of heart health advice. Figs bring a genuinely impressive fiber content to the table as well, both the soluble and insoluble kind, which supports regular digestion, something that becomes a more pressing daily concern for a lot of people as they get older. That fiber also helps moderate how quickly the natural sugar in figs hits your bloodstream, softening what would otherwise be a fairly quick sugar spike from a food this sweet. Figs contain a range of antioxidants as well, compounds that help your body manage the everyday cellular wear and tear that adds up over decades. Figs have also traditionally been used, going back centuries, as a gentle remedy for constipation, and modern fiber research backs that reputation up. A few dried figs before bed is a genuinely useful, food-based alternative for anyone dealing with occasional digestive sluggishness, often working just as well as an over-the-counter product without any of the harsh cramping some of those products can cause. The caution with figs, particularly dried figs, is portion size. They're calorie-dense and high in natural sugar compared to most vegetables on this list. So anyone managing diabetes or watching their weight should treat a small handful as a serving rather than eating them by the cupful. Dried figs are also relatively high in fiber, which is generally a good thing, but eating a large quantity quickly can cause digestive discomfort in people not used to that much fiber at once. Food number 12, okra. Okra doesn't appear in scripture. It wasn't cultivated in the ancient Near East, and it isn't a food you'll find tied to any biblical story. I'm not going to pretend otherwise just to force a verse onto it. It's a staple across Mediterranean, African, and Middle Eastern cooking today, closely related in spirit to the humble, unglamorous vegetables the biblical world would have recognized and valued. And it happens to be an excellent calcium source that earns its place on this list on nutrition alone. A cup of cooked okra delivers around 80 milligrams of calcium, alongside a genuinely impressive dose of vitamin K and folate. What makes okra particularly interesting is a compound found in its distinctive sliminess, a soluble fiber called mucilage, which has been shown in research to help slow down sugar absorption in the gut and may modestly improve blood sugar control, something that matters enormously for the large number of older adults managing prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. Okra is also notably low in calories while being high in both fiber and water content, which makes it a smart choice for anyone trying to feel full and satisfied without piling on calories. And its fiber content supports the same kind of gut health benefits we've discussed with beans and chickpeas throughout this video. Some early research has also looked at compounds in okra for their potential to support healthy cholesterol levels, though this area of study is still developing and shouldn't be oversold. Okra also contains a meaningful amount of vitamin C, alongside its calcium and vitamin K, which, as we'll get to shortly with oranges, actually helps your body make better use of the calcium sitting right there in the same vegetable. A nice little nutritional partnership happening in a single pot. There's very little downside to okra for most people. The main practical note is that some people find the texture off-putting when it's overcooked or boiled without enough acid, which brings out more of that sliminess. So, roasting or sautéing with a splash of lemon or vinegar tends to produce a texture most people find far more enjoyable while keeping every bit of the nutrition intact. Food number 13, broccoli. Like okra, broccoli has no biblical roots. It's a relatively modern cultivar developed from wild cabbage, and the ancient world simply did not have it on the table. We're including it here because a video promising real, practical calcium sources for your health would be doing you a disservice by leaving it out just to keep every entry biblical, and broccoli is one of the most accessible, everyday vegetables genuinely worth building a habit around. A cup of cooked broccoli provides roughly 60 milligrams of calcium, which sounds modest next to sardines or collards, but broccoli's real strength is the surrounding nutritional package. It's loaded with vitamin C, which plays a supporting role in bone collagen formation, meaning it helps calcium actually get woven into the structural framework of your bones, rather than just floating around. Broccoli also brings vitamin K to the table for the same calcium-directing benefit we've discussed with the leafy greens on this list. Broccoli belongs to the same cruciferous vegetable family as kale and turnip greens, and it carries the same class of protective plant compounds that have been studied extensively for their potential role in reducing the risk of certain cancers, along with supporting the body's natural detoxification processes in the liver. It's also a genuinely satisfying, high-fiber, low-calorie food, useful for anyone trying to manage weight or blood sugar without feeling like they're constantly hungry. One small tip worth mentioning: steaming broccoli rather than boiling it preserves considerably more of its vitamin C and calcium, since boiling allows a good portion of both to leach directly into the cooking water, which then usually gets poured down the drain along with a chunk of the nutrition you were trying to get in the first place. The caution is minor and specific. Very large amounts of raw cruciferous vegetables can mildly interfere with thyroid hormone production in people with existing thyroid conditions, though cooking largely deactivates the compounds responsible, so a normal cooked serving a few times a week is not something the average person needs to worry about. If you're on thyroid medication and eating unusually large amounts of raw broccoli daily, it's worth a quick check-in with your doctor. Food number 14. Oranges. Oranges are another entry with no direct line back to Scripture, since citrus fruit, as we know it today, largely spread through the Mediterranean world centuries after the biblical period closes. We're including it because vitamin C plays such a direct, practical role in how well your body actually uses the calcium you're eating from everything else on this list. And oranges are one of the simplest, most universally available ways to get it. A medium orange contains around 50 to 60 milligrams of calcium itself, a real but modest contribution, but its bigger role here is as a partner nutrient. Vitamin C supports the production of collagen, the protein scaffolding that calcium actually attaches to within your bones, and some research has linked higher vitamin C intake to better bone density in older adults, particularly women, likely for exactly this reason. Pairing a calcium-rich food with something high in vitamin C, like a piece of cheese and an orange together, is a genuinely smart, simple habit. Oranges also bring real cardiovascular benefits to the table. The fiber in whole oranges, particularly the pith and membranes most people peel away without a second thought, helps moderate cholesterol, and the potassium content supports healthy blood pressure. The vitamin C itself is a strong antioxidant, supporting immune function at a stage of life when the immune system doesn't bounce back quite as quickly as it once did, and some research suggests it may modestly reduce the duration of common colds. There's also something worth knowing if you're on certain medications. Grapefruit gets most of the attention for interacting with prescription drugs, but oranges are generally considered safe alongside the medications that cause problems with grapefruit, which makes an orange a much simpler, lower-risk citrus choice for most people managing a longer medication list, though it's always worth double-checking with your pharmacist if you're unsure. The caution here is mostly about acidity. Oranges and orange juice can aggravate acid reflux and heartburn in people prone to it, and the natural sugar in juice, without the fiber of the whole fruit, can spike blood sugar more quickly than eating an orange whole. Choosing the whole fruit over juice solves most of this problem at once, giving you the fiber back and slowing down how quickly the sugar hits your system. Food number 15, sesame seeds. Here's the surprise I promised at the start of this video. Sesame doesn't get a single, unmistakable verse of its own in most English translations, but it was one of the most heavily cultivated and traded crops across the entire ancient Near East, including the biblical world, pressed for its oil and ground into pastes for thousands of years before anyone wrote a word of the Old Testament. The sesame-based sweets and pastes still central to Middle Eastern kitchens today are a direct, living thread back to exactly the region and era the Bible describes. Now here's the number that tends to stop people in their tracks. Whole sesame seeds contain somewhere around 900 to 1,000 milligrams of calcium per 100 grams, which works out to roughly 70 to 90 milligrams in a single tablespoon. Tahini, the ground sesame paste used to make hummus, carries a similarly impressive amount. Gram for gram, sesame seeds contain more calcium than almost any other food on this list. A couple of tablespoons sprinkled over your morning oatmeal or stirred into a salad, dressing genuinely rivals a full glass of milk in calcium content. Beyond the calcium itself, sesame seeds are rich in magnesium, another mineral essential for actually building strong bone, and they contain compounds called lignans, natural plant chemicals with antioxidant properties that some research has linked to modest improvements in cholesterol and reduced inflammation. Most of the fat in sesame seeds is the heart-friendly unsaturated kind, similar to what you'd find in olive oil, supporting healthy cholesterol levels when it replaces less healthy fats in your diet. For anyone avoiding dairy entirely, whether by choice or necessity, sesame seeds and tahini are quietly one of the single best replacements available. There's one more practical detail worth knowing. Whole sesame seeds, especially unhulled ones, hold on to their calcium better than the oil, since pressing seeds into oil strips out nearly all the minerals along with it. So if calcium is the goal, reaching for the whole seeds or tahini paste, rather than sesame oil, is the choice that actually delivers. Two real cautions here, and they matter. Sesame is one of the most common food allergens, officially recognized as a major allergen in the United States. So this is absolutely not a food to introduce carelessly if there's any known sensitivity. And sesame seeds are relatively high in oxalates, similar to almonds, which means anyone with a history of calcium oxalate kidney stones should keep portions moderate and check with their doctor rather than eating them by the spoonful daily. So, there you have it. 15 genuine calcium powerhouses, most of them rooted in the same soil and the same stories that shaped the biblical world, all of them backed by real, current nutrition science rather than trends or guesswork. You don't need to eat all 15 every week. Pick 3 or 4 that actually sound good to you. Work them into meals you already make, and let that become the habit, because consistency over months and years is what actually protects your bones, not any single perfect day of eating. If you're wondering which one I personally reach for the most, it's sardines. There's something about getting calcium, vitamin D, and omega-3 fats all in one small tin, no cooking required, that makes it the easiest habit I've ever kept. Before you go, one more reminder. Everything in this video is meant to inform you, not to replace an actual conversation with your doctor, especially if you're managing osteoporosis, kidney stones, thyroid issues, or you're on blood thinners or blood pressure medication. Your own health history matters more than any general list ever could. If this was helpful, you know what to do. I'll see you in the next one.